Hello and welcome to the Ireland on the Fly podcast about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland. This week we speak to Judd Ruane, the well-known sea trout fishing guide on the Moy Estuary. Judd talks to us about the incredible days he's had, as well as some of the famous names that have been in his boat. Plus you'll also hear about 16 years on the road touring Ireland, the UK and America with a Glen Miller style big band. And it's fair to say that Judd has more than a few stories to tell. But first, Tom, some developments I believe in relation to youth fly fishing here in Ireland.
Yeah, good man, Dara. Good to see you back and suitably rested after your recent break. So good to have you back with us. But
I'm wearing my beret.
And you're eating garlic and croissants. Not together. But
Hello.
Oh, that's awful.
Showing my age. Remember that program?
I do.
That's how I speak French, pretty much.
Yeah. You didn't do any fishing over there.
No, actually, do we have time? Will I tell you? The catfish. So we were a week in Provence, not a year, a week in Provence, and in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region, and the Rhone River was flowing nearby. Beautiful, stunning river, about a couple of 100 feet wide. It was just absolutely stunning river, and so I was looking up, I was going online, geez, there has to be some fishing here, I wonder what kind of fishing there is. But there's no trout fishing, it's all higher up, kind of in the colder, higher altitude up near the Alps. But what the fishing is there is catfish. And and there's guides that do it, right? Yeah, exactly, that was my... So they... apologies to anyone who's into catfishing, but I don't think there's many fly anglers into catfish. You're talking about, I don't know, these bigger than a man, probably 100, 200 pounds. They're big whiskers. And there's pictures of these fellas just struggling to hold them but then, anyway, after watching, I'd seen these pictures, and then the next day we're driving north. It was probably about half an hour north, and we're coming up onto a height, and the Rhone River is still on our right. I see the two big towers of a nuclear power plant right on the banks of the Rhone River. It's so that's why the catfish are 200 pounds. And all I could think of was
Springfield.
Fields,
And the three-eyed catfish.
So I was that explains everything. So yeah, suffice to say I didn't do any fishing.
Yeah, no fishing. Well, I'm completely with you on that one. We'll have our differences on salmon and trout. Okay, that's fair enough. But I'm completely with you. I'm not very attractive. Oh God!
My God! How anyone can fish for them? But anyways, I'm sure there'll be people.
Size
is it everything?
In fishing, anyway.
But yeah, the nuclear power plant just was the final nail in the coffin for me.
I think so. Yeah.
Sorry. Go on. You were telling me.
So look, and we've often discussed here about what can be done and what various clubs and everything can do to encourage youth angling. But the guys up in Frogs Sick, that's the Foyle River Catchment Outdoor Group, and remember we were talking about them before because a couple of those guys were on the very successful youth team. But they're actually running a big youth competition up out in Lochmelvin, and the world's youth fly fishing champion. Well, I'll just get it there. It's the World Youth Loch Style Championship. Brilliant. And that's great, and it's for all youths, and it's going to be held on Sunday, the 8th of September, up in Lochmelvin. This is great, and it's I've said before how much I like the competitions, and a lot of the competitions that are open to the kids are just qualifiers. So this is a chance for youths all over the country to have a competition like the grown-ups have. You can get more information on it on the Facebook page, which is Frogs Sick. I might put that up in the social media post. But that's on Sunday, the 8th of September. So, no, it's great. And as I said, we're always, it comes up a lot when we're talking to people on the show about getting youths into angling and the number of youths getting down. And, this is competition fishing isn't for everybody. But, if this is a medium that can get more young people fishing, great. So.
Well, and also there's nothing like success.
Yep.
Success breeds success, and you build on. This is the time to build on the momentum. Yeah. Where the youths have won 4 in a row, they're doing brilliant. You're seeing young anglers coming into the Irish senior setup as well, and doing really well on the world stage. So this is like, if you want to encourage youths and you can you want to be like these guys, they're winning 4 in a row, you too can be one of the best. Like, so I think it's a great opportunity to build on that.
Yeah, because like as you say, like currently in youths lock style fishing in the Four Nations, the Irish, the Irish, the Irish are the team to beat. You know, 4 in a row. Yeah, so that's it. So this is great, and you're right. Success is very good for things like that because it brings success attracts more people into it. So
Exactly.
fantastic. So yeah, look, we'll put a link up to that on the social media posts, and that's on Sunday the 8th of September in Loch Melvin.
Super. So look, let's get back to this week's guest, Judd Ruane, to tell us about fishing on the Moy Estuary for sea trout. And I asked Judd about how this season has gone so far for him.
It's been difficult because the North Atlantic drift is as they call it, or the Gulf Stream. It's way out of place. It's way out further, and we've been like since May. It's been wind. Particularly here for us, it's been northwest wind. And a new thing has happened that I've discovered with the sea trout this year is that normally when a fish comes in on the bar, right at the mouth of the estuary, if you're fishing the bar, which is difficult this year, I can tell you, because the seas have been so rough. But when you catch a fish at the bar, and it's his first day into the estuary, he's just like a bar of silver. The spots on him are very, very faint. And but as the year went on, what we discovered was that we're catching fish at the bar and inside the bar with spots on them. Like when these fish come in the first day with no spots, for every day that they're in the estuary, the spots become more prominent. And then they eventually will turn to kind of what you might call a steel grey colour. And so they've been in for a while. And really what that happens is they come in for feeding from April onwards and what have you, and they're quite thin, but they will have spawn in them. And the spawn, it's no more than the thickness of a match. And of course that develops as the year goes on. But they come into the basin of the estuary where they're feeding on shrimp and sand eels and later in the year when the herring fry comes in. And but what's happening this year is that we're catching fish with big spots on them coming back in. So these winds obviously is driving them back out into the sea again. And I've never experienced this ever before. And when we catch them, how you really know that they're coming back in is because they've got sea lice on them. So they've gone back out to the sea and what have you. So that's one of the strange things that has been happening.
And you're saying that you reckon the wind is what's driving them back out, is it?
Well, I tell you, about 2 years ago, the first time I became aware of fish backing out was we had a 1-day storm, and I knew in advance there was going to be a storm, so I cancelled. And so the following day, I had 3 guys from England, and it was a beautiful day, not a whisper of wind, blue skies, and what have you. And I said, lads, hey, we're in business. We're going to have a great day today. So we went down fishing. The first bite we got, 3 o'clock.
My God. And
we were fishing from maybe 10 o'clock or 10:30. And so anyway, we had a very, very poor day. And so my daughter and my son-in-law were down on the island on our family boat. And at about 7 o'clock, when I was back, it was a glorious evening. Carol rang me from Bartow Island to say, Dad, the river is erupting with fish jumping all over the place. So the following day, I had 2 boats out, and we went down maybe about halfway down a place called the Castle, and literally every cast, bang, we're into them. And so then I started to think, what's going on here? So obviously, the estuary had emptied out, in my opinion, during the storm, and the following day, we had a bad day. But that evening, they came out on the evening tide.
Yes.
And the following day,
Returned.
here we're into fish big time. So I've been watching it ever since. And I tell you, some of the cold winds that we've had down there. I had a Dutch, I had a Dutch father and son on the boat in late June. And late June should be the peak of the run, right? We had a westerly wind, and when you have a westerly wind you see the Moy Estuary, it's one of the only two estuaries in the country that runs from south to north.
Okay.
And so it's the Moy and the Foyle. When we get a westerly wind, it's on sideways on us. If we get a south wind or a north wind, you can imagine if you have an incoming tide with the north wind, you have the protection of the cabin of the boat, so you know you're sheltered. But when you have a side wind, as from the west, this wind from the west was so bitterly cold. For the first time in all the years I'm going down there, I had to bring the Dutch gentleman into the cabin, and I made him a hot toddy, and he sat down, and he was. I made it in a mug for him, and that's how extreme it was.
And this was in June, as he said, like.
Yeah. So I mean, this has been going on right through the season, and when we get a calm day, we get great fishing. Even the weathermen are having difficulties. I have bait farmers from Clare Valley in Tyrone. They come down fishing with me 3 or 4 times a year, and they were down in May, and 3 days before they arrived, I got a bad forecast, and I rang up and I said, lads, I said, don't come because it's not going to fish. And they said, well, unless it's blown a hurricane, we're coming. So they arrived, and lo and behold, we got one of the best days of the year. And the first fish that came into the boat was 3.5 pounds.
Oh, Jesus.
And it was just incredible. We got what? Right. It was just one of those special days. And yet the forecast was for strong winds and blah, 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 what have you. So it's been that's been 2024.
Yeah, it seems to be across the board, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah, it has been. Really has been across the board. It's we're getting that from all sides. Very interesting. There has been a predominance of northwest winds, all right, Judd. Like, because I'm not too far geographically away from you here down Galway beside you. Does the northwest wind, you don't like it, do you not?
No, it affects the fish. They're very sensitive to the elements.
Yeah.
I tell you, they're worse than women. They just, I'm not kind of that can switch off like that. I'll give you an example. I had Nick Faldo in the boat. He bought Barter Island to put a golf course on it, but that fell through. However, I had him on the boat one day, and we had, before there was any restrictions on catch and whatever, with 33 fish. And it was practically every cast and what have you. And suddenly, this wind come over the sand dunes from Bartra and Enniscrone. And like that, they just switched off and we're fishing, not a bite. So Faldo says to me, come here, where are all the fish gone? I said, they're not gone anywhere. They just switched off. And that was it. Not another fish but the day. That's how sensitive they are to the elements.
Tell us, Judd, people obviously know the Moy, okay? But the Moy Estuary, give us a bit of background maybe to kind of fishing on the Moy Estuary itself.
The Moy Estuary has been fished for yonks. And the old boys, in talking to them, I learned that one of the baits they used to use was an eel skin. And they would catch what we call a white-bellied eel. They would skin the eel, salt the skin, and then cut a bait accordingly and tie it on the hook. And that one bait would do for the whole season. But the night before they started to go fishing, they would have to soak it in water because when it dried out, it was like a piece of leather. And I have a wonderful book by a gentleman called James Waltham, And I tell you, any would-be
yeah. I remember it. I was trying to think where. Go on, sorry, I'm cutting in. But I was trying to think where have I got it? It's in. Go on, sorry, Judd, I'm cutting in.
Trout flies, right?
Yeah.
And just to kind of renew a few. I mean, this is my Bible actually. When I was fishing the salt water, James Waltham was the Bible. I tell you, in it, he tells about the old people. They made an eel skin fly, and he describes it the same way. They would skin the eel, and they would salt the eel, the skin. And basically, what you do is like what we do with the mackerel today. You salt the fish to get rid of the bacteria, and then it doesn't go off. Yeah. And so you can have it there for weeks. But anyway, and then when you have your skin salted and what have you, then you cut your shape of your fly, and you fold it and put it on, and and whatever he said, what was special, the old fishermen they felt as there was something special about the oil skin. Now for the mackerel that I fish, mackerel strips, it's the oil, and that's the scent. Right, and I would imagine that it was the scent from the oil, the skin eel as well, or the eel skin, I should say.
I've read that book. It's a great book. I read it years ago. But the only thing is, and it struck me that their sense of smell must be fantastic, because you're basically curing the leather, or not the leather, but you're curing it. But obviously, there's remnants even after it's cured that the fish pick up on.
Yeah. I'll tell you, I made a big faux pas this year. One of the problems we have with salting fish is that basically what I do is I get it has to be fresh, really fresh. Like for instance, if I go out into the bay to catch bait, like mackerel, then within a half an hour of catching that fish, I will gut it to because the ammonia in it starts to go off and get soft so fast. So, and then the rigor mortis, once you get the gut out, the rigor mortis sets in and it's stiff. So you bring it home, you fillet it, and you salt it, and you leave it overnight, and then there's a name I can't think of the word. But anyway, you see all of this fluid in the morning that's that drains out of it. But it's to kill the bacteria, right? But basically what I do then, I leave it for 24 hours before I freeze it. But if you leave it in too long in the deep freeze, it will actually turn brown like smoked fish, which is no good, right? Mm-hmm. So what I do now is when I catch the fish, I go to it and I freeze it immediately, and then I take it out maybe a day or two before I need to fish it, and I will salt it and what have you, because if you don't salt it, when it thaws out, it just crumbles, and it falls at the skin. It won't hold on the hook. But what being smart this year, I was too cute for my own good. I decided I started experimenting. So when I filleted the fish, I put it into salt. I made a brine. That was the word I was thinking of. Brine.
Yeah.
I got just tap water, put salt into it, a lot of salt, and then put the fish into it, and of course left it there for a number of hours, and like you would do with smoked fish, when you're smoking fish, and so anyway, Anyway, it was a failure, and I'll tell you why. Because what I discovered was all the oil was seeping out, was sucking out, and it was in the water. When I threw away the water, I was throwing all the oil away. So basically, I was left with a piece of meat that had no scent on it. Yeah, because the oil
permeated. It permeated out through the liquid.
Yeah.
When you just have salt, the oil is retained in it. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. When I do it the other way, and as soon as you dip that into the water, it's like the colors of the rainbow. Like when you put a touch of petrol into water, you see all the colors of rainbow. When you put a strip of mackerel into the water, you will see the colors of the rainbow. That's the oil coming. That's in the fish.
And tell me this though, back to James Waltham. Did you ever tie his eel skin fly?
Is which?
You know,
which
the fly that he does with the eel skin.
The which?
You know, he does the fly with the eel skin, the cured eel
No,
skin.
I didn't. No, because I tell you, there was an old gentleman down the coast that had told me about the eel skin and what have you. But at this stage, what happened here was that you're going back to the 1800s now when he's talking about the eel skin. And it was a clergyman in Killala who discovered the mackerel strip was the business. Now, I'll give you an example. Do you remember Louis Stewart, the guitar player?
Yes, yes.
Well, Louis used to come down to my pub where I had the jazz sessions, and Louis wasn't a fisherman, but he fell in love with the estuary and everything I was doing, and he would spend a week with me after, he wouldn't go home.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was fishing with me for about 3 years, but doing these things and no success. And one day he was on the boat with me, and we had I had a guest from Switzerland, and we 66 fish we had, and on the mackerel strip, and we ran out of bait. So I had some flounder, and we cut the belly of the flounder, put it on the hook. We could see we had clear water. We could see the fish coming in after them. I mean, when I say fish, we could see a shoal of fish following in the bait, and they're like a flock of birds. You know, when you see a flock of birds in the air, and they're in a V like that. There's a lead bird. Well, the fish are the same way. I've seen it over the years when we had clear water. That's gone now. But you would have one leader, right, on a fish, and if he turns away, the whole shoal will turn away. I mean, you're hard to be in your mouth looking at this thing coming in. But so we could see the fish coming in following the flounder bait. They never touched it. So I decided to cut up the belly of a sea trout, and failure again. And whatever it is about the mackerel, that was the business.
So what was it about the sea trout and the estuary for you that you decided to focus in on that?
Oh, well, I tell you, the estuary is a very special place. We're very privileged in this town to have an estuary like the Moy Estuary on our doorstep. My first trip to the estuary was in 1949. My aunt was home from America, and I was invited to take this trip to Barge Island. And it was on a boat, a white boat, belonged to a man called Jimmy Connolly. He had an inboard engine, which was a one-cylinder engine, because I inquired afterwards, because the engine went put. And so we arrived on Barge Island. I can't remember getting onto the boat. I can't remember getting off the boat, but I can remember standing on the southern tip of Barge Island on a hill looking out onto the estuary. And that's the day I fell in love with the estuary. And I brought that picture postcard image around the world with me. I mean, when I was a musician, we were traveling in America, earning 3 times our Irish salary and what have you, and we were living like kings. Do you know where I wanted to be? Down the estuary on my little boat.
Yeah.
I bought my first boat when I was 14. I was working at that stage. I was touring with my father's band, and it was £30, and it was a large clinker-built boat with a 1.5 horsepower Seagull engine. And I had my bicycle, and I had my 1.5 horsepower Seagull, and by Jesus, I was like Lord Muck. There was nobody like me. And all you needed then was, I just needed a spare plug, a little spanner, and a bit of sandpaper, and a cloth, and off you went. And I had, right through my teenage life, that's where I wanted to be. Now, I did a bit of salmon fishing. I was never very good at it. I fished with some good fishermen. What I got to tell you, nothing though. I used to fish with a fellow called Slim Cawley. I fished with 3 of them: Slim, Jackdaw, and Smokey.
Brilliant.
That's what wonderful names, right? So, and I couldn't figure out how I was so popular with these boys. And they were older than me and what have you. It suddenly dawned on me one day. The trick was they only had bicycles. I had the wheels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not kidding you. I could write a book on my memories of the boys. And they said, have you got a gun? I says, a gun? No, we never got a gun. Oh, come on. So they brought me down the town, bought a gun, and we went off shooting rabbits and pigeons and what have you. And then they said, did you ever, they went off looking for rabbits with the ferret. I never saw a ferret in my life. And Jack Jaw puts his hand in his pocket and he pulls this thing out of his pocket with a little head looking at me with a muzzle on it. So they take me out ferreting. And and Slim has his ear down to the ground and he's in there, he's at that little bastard, he has one. The muzzle must be off him.
Jesus.
I tell you, one day we were down the country and we were passing this farm and they saw the rabbits, the burrows. So out of the back, I had the bandwagon, and so we went in.
The actual bandwagon.
Oh yeah. We went in anyway, and the boys put in the ferret, and the ferret didn't come out. So they started digging. And the next thing, the farmer starts walking down the field, and the boy says, "Now keep your mouth shut. Leave it to us." So when the farmer arrives down, sir, we saw the fox going in here, and we're trying to get him out. Well, God bless you. Hang on a second now. I go up to the farm. He comes down with a few spades, and the boy says to me, "Go off the far side of the ditch, and if you see that bird come out, don't let the farmer see him. Put them into your pocket," and so on. So anyway, they got the furs and but look at, I could write a book on them. They were wonderful, but they were great anglers.
Where was home growing up? Was it?
I grew up on the back of a band. I grew up on the back of a bandwagon.
Yeah, I was going to say, forgive my ignorance, Judd. I didn't realise the musical background. So maybe you might just fill us in a bit on that. You mentioned your father's band.
Ah, yeah, my dad was a band leader. From the 40s and what have you. And of course, in those days, they were a sit-down band. They were doing the Glen Miller stuff. And I lived in our house. We had like in the early 50s. We had a fellow called Noel Cesare from Calcutta in India, who was basically he was the Nat King Cole of Ireland, and he lived in our house. And then we had Eva for Burma, and we had Ebron from Malaysia, and they all stayed in our home with us. And it was fascinating to hear their stories about their lives and what have you. And I was very influenced by them and what have you. But anyway, because there was a musical paper in England called The Melody Maker, and a lot of the brass, my dad, he had kind of 4 or 5 saxes at varying times, and 3 brass, and most of his brass players, trumpets and trombone and whatever, were from England, or Scotland or Wales and so on. I mean, the 2 guys that taught me how to play trumpet were from both of them were from one was Scotland and the other was from Wales. So I mean, music was in the blood. So I started learning an instrument, what have you. And I did my first English tour with the band when I was 12 years of age. And I had done my primary in the national school at that stage. And so I did the college entrance exam and sat out in the street and refused to go to the college. And Mom says to me, "Well, if you don't go to school, I'm going to have to call your dad." So he comes out in his pajamas and sits down the curb out the street beside me. He said, "What's wrong, son?" So anyway, I was sent off to a private school and it lasted about 6 months. And after that, I was on the road. And so when I was 14, went on from there. When I was 14, I bought my first boat for £30 and what have you. And so I stayed on the road my dad retired in 68. I became band leader. I got a formal musical education with some wonderful musicians working with the band. And you know, you're only as good as the guy you're working beside, as you know. And I had these wonderful people around me. And and my brother joined the band as well, Jack, and he was the vocalist and he played guitar. I was a trumpet player, and I did all the arranging then from then on. And but I mean, there was a transition period. A lot of these sit-down bands just disappeared overnight with the advent of rock and roll, with the Bill Haley and Vance Domino and all this type of thing, Presley. And we were very fortunate that we had a guy called George Patterson, who had qualified. He got his degree in the Royal College of Music. And when he left us, he became the MD for Tom Jones, Engelbert Humperdinck, and Lulu. And he toured with them. And then when we started making records, he produced our records as well. And but anyway, I could see the writing on the wall for the end of the dance hall business towards the end of the 60s. And so I started thinking about how was I going to put a roof over my head, and I ended up buying a pub. And my wife didn't speak to me for a long time after I bought it because she said, I'm not going to rear my kids in a pub. And what have you. But I said, no, that's not going to happen, what have you. But anyway, she came around and it was very successful. We were there for nearly 30 years. We won 22 awards, Super Pub of Ireland, the Portfolio Best Cup Public House, and so on and so on.
That was the Riverboat Inn, was that right, Judd?
Riverboat Inn. And then I started running jazz sessions. And of course, all the boys that worked with me, that's what we wanted to play anyway, but you couldn't play it when you were in the dance hall. And so that became a very important part of it. And then my fishing, I used to take every Wednesday off. And of course, I would come back with a string of trout. And, you know, Georgina Carberry in Clifton. We used to play in Clifton. I'm going back now. When I was on the road with the band, we would go to one of the places we would play in Clifton. And the secretary of the Trout Anglers Association of Clifton was a lady called Georgina Carberry. The band would go there and sit in her kitchen, and she would feed us before we would get on stage. And most days, or most evenings, on a peg under her back door, there would be a string of trout. And I got talking to her, and she said, "Oh, no problem." And this is when Connemara, Connemara was the best sea trout fishery in the world before the fish farms and what have you. And so when thinking of Georgina, when I bought my pub, I had a peg on my back door of the pub, and I did the same thing. And of course, these Germans and French were coming and saying, "How can we catch how can we go?" And there was nobody taking guys fishing. And there was an English guy called Brian Butterfield, who was the manager of a tool factory in Ballina. He said, "Judd, you should do that." And I said, "Jesus, I'm not into that at all." And one Wednesday morning, I come out, and there's three guys from France or somewhere, and they're saying, "Mr. Brian said that you were taking us fishing today." So I'm caught. And so I go out and we got a lot of fish. It was no problem in those days. Got a lot of fish and what have you. So my uncle, who was real droll and smoking the pipe, he was waiting for me walking back from the boat up to the pub. And he says, "Well," and I said, "Oh yeah, wait, did you get paid?" I said, "Yeah." I said, I asked them for a tenner. And I said, they gave me £1 of a tip. And I was thrilled with myself.
Yeah.
He said, do they know you're the proprietor? And I says, "Well, they do know." I says, "Because I'm after inviting them up for a pint." "That's the last fucking tip you're going to get." So that was my first day. that was a memorable day. And the next thing, I started getting write-ups in Germany and France and what have you, and it went on from there. And suddenly I end up with there was a huge input of business into Ireland from West Germany, and 80% of my business then turned out. And of course, they loved the jazz, so everything fell into place. I was selling pints. They're bringing the fishing. They come in on a Sunday morning or a Thursday night for my jazz and what have you, and it was just a complete package.
Oh, fantastic! When was this, Judd? What roughly was this? The
Well,
80s,
I
the
bought
70s?
the
When?
73, which was
Yeah.
a galvanized cottage, a cottage
Yeah.
with a galvanized roof. I lived for 3 years in a caravan, a mobile home, right outside the door of the pub. And I was lucky I wasn't divorced because we had 3 kids at that stage, and there was no sewage at the quay in Ballina when we went down. So you were gone back to the dark ages, pea pots under the bed. And so when I convinced the bank that I was able to make a go of it, they gave me a few bob to put in the next thing. So I built a lounge at the back with 5 bedrooms and so on. And eventually I kept extending until I had 10 guest rooms at the back. And I bought the fishery store, which was a building right beside me. I went back to the 1860s and a granite stone building, and that's where they housed all their nets and salmon boxes and what have you. And I tried to buy it and failed. And later on, then in 1982, I got it. And eventually, I turned that into a restaurant and some rooms overhead, and went on from there, like, you know.
Jeez, fair play. Tell me, you were on the road, like, in Ireland and the UK, was that right, with the band? And like, would that have been like 10, 15, 20 years you were doing it, or how long roughly?
Oh, I did that from 58 to 74.
Wow, nearly 16 years. Like, that's a hard life.
It was a great life when you were young.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, you have the world at your feet, and you thought you were a superstar, and you were, you know, it's well, when I started, it was actually the first time I did a gig with the band, I had a short pants. I had my Holy Communion suit on me. It was just a good song, right? And I toured the Arsenal trousers that night, tried to rob an orchard. A marquee in Mount Bellew, and it was fenced off, you know, and there was an orchard right beside it. And I said to the leader of the band, I said, "Hey, look at that!" Of course, that's how we entertained ourselves back in those days. What would you do at night? You go up and rob orchards, or whether it be somebody's blah blah blah. It was all innocent stuff, really, wasn't it? But anyway,
quick ones on that. What was the name of the band, and how many people were in the band?
Judd Ruane. He was the first band in Ireland to tour in England in 1947. And the reason for that was when Lent came, with the exception of Dublin and a few cities, I'm not sure if Galway was included in that. Maybe Limerick or Waterford or Cork. There was no dancing in Ireland other than from Shrove Tuesday up to St. Patrick's Night. So you couldn't keep a band together. So the band would disband. And during the war, he was in England. He was a motoring correspondent for one of the English papers and what have you. And but he was working at night with some band. I forget the name of the band. Anyway, when he came back, he decided that when it came to Lent, he would take his band to England. So there was a solicitor in town, Mulligan, who owned the town hall in Ballina, and he gave him the Shrove Tuesday night. And the take-ins from Shrove, and it was a sellout. Even in my lifetime, it was a sellout on Shrove Tuesday night. That paid the fare for everybody, the band, to go to England. And he spent 6 weeks over there, touring in all the Irish clubs, from the Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, Birmingham, right down to London and what have you. And you know, and then everybody got into the in the act. And then I did my first American tour with the band in 62. I was 17. And that was some experience. And I have a guy, Eugene McCaffrey, who has played guitar with me for about 40 years. And he says, not too long ago, he says, Judd, he says, do you remember the first time? Actually, it wasn't Kennedy Airport, it was Idlewild. And nobody heard of Kennedy at that stage. And he said, do you remember driving in from Idlewild Airport, he says, into Manhattan that first day? I says, I do. He says, and everything was glass, and everything was so big. And it was, do you know the joke about the Americans with everything bigger and better and what have you? Yeah. And we experienced that, and it was absolutely magic. So, and we played the first opening night, which was at the City Centre in New York, and we drove from there to Chicago right after the gig, and it went on from there, and we went to this dude ranch we worked up very hard in the States. We worked 6 hours a week, 2 hours Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday night, and after that they didn't want to see you until the next Friday. And we got 3 times the salary.
Oh my God! Wow. That 16 years you were on the road was fishing at all in your mind? Was it off the scene? Was it something you kind of did when you came back home?
No, I'll tell you, I was a 9.5 stone weight then, so I had endless energy, right? I got married in 68, and my wife used to. The only way we had of getting new songs and what have you was Radio Luxembourg. This RTE didn't radio air, and there was no pop. So Jane used to record everything on a Sunday night on Radio Luxembourg for me. And on Monday, unless I was, like for instance, if I was playing in Cork or someplace, when I got back, maybe at 7 o'clock in the morning, I wouldn't go to bed. I got into the boat and was gone for the day down to Barcha. And when I came home then, I was able to bring her to the pictures. And that night then I'd start betting what the songs I needed to go up that. And I would invariably do the arrangements for the band and what have you, and so on. But every opportunity I had, I was in the boat.
That was your escape.
It was, but I tell you, it was like a magnet, and it was incredible, the pull, and was I happy in the boat, And people to this day say to me, would you ever go out fishing by yourself? Well, I don't get much of an opportunity now. No. But I'm like a pig in shit, when I get into the boat by myself. Because you can experiment and you can, you're not tied.
Taz, you said you were doing the guiding, Judge, just when you had the riverboat in, as part of it. Were you guiding on the estuary then? Were you guiding on the rivers?
It was strictly the estuary.
Talk to us a bit about the saltwater fly fishing, because I read on your website you were saying in terms of the influence of Peter OReilly.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I met Peter OReilly in Lansdowne Road. Jack Charlton bought a house here in Ballina and what have you. And so I need to tell you about his first day with me. And remind me to go back to Peter OReilly. Peter, when I meet him, and Charlton used to put the two of us sitting beside one another. So that's how we met. And he would start quizzing me about how was the sea trout. And I say, yeah, we're doing very well, and we're fishing this, that, and other, whatever. You ever tried to fly? And I said, not really. We had no success with it. I've had Bob Church over, and I've had this one and that one and what have you, and I've had no success. And I really never chased it up. So I better continue with Peter. I met him one day, then he left coming off the estuary. And he says, I'm after having a great day down there. And I said, what did you catch them on? He says, I can't tell you that. Now, here's what the guy called PJ Nally, who was a guard in Castleburn. And Peter wasn't like that. I got to know I have to say, Peter was one of the most special people that I've ever met in the angling world.
Mm.
He was special, and he was very honest, and he was, he would help you in any way that he thought possible. He was really great, and anybody that I've met ever since who knew him would have the same thing to say about him. He was very knowledgeable. He really was. There wasn't a day that I went out with him that I didn't learn something new. And he'd make you feel good. He'd compliment you. You're doing this, that, and other good. He was an absolute magic. But he says, I can't tell you, and I straight away I suspected it was because of who was with him, that he didn't want to divulge how they caught. But it turned out that the success of the day was with a fly called the Baltic Special, which was tied with pearl lure flash on the body and blue lure flash on the wing, and it was given to PJ Nelly by a German angling writer, and but I didn't find that out for years afterwards. So anyway, that tickled my fancy, and I had a skipper on my boat. I just owned the one boat. I put a skipper on my boat. I says, hey, you do the fishing now, and I says, I need to experiment. So I spent a fortune on every fly that you could think of, and I went down and I caught nothing. And when I did eventually catch a fish, I didn't know what I was doing right. And when I wasn't catching fish, I didn't know what I was doing wrong. So that was the easy way to explain it to you. Until one day, a guy called Roy Williams came over to a rugby match. My son was Willie Ruane. He's the CEO of Connacht Rugby now. Yeah. But anyway, he was playing rugby as a youngster with Ballina. And they had a guy over from Wales doing a trial for the team and what have you. And his friend, Roy Williams, was with me. I didn't know he was an angler, but he said to me, any place he said I could do a bit of salmon fishing. And I said, yeah, I said, up the river, blah, blah, blah. So we got him fishing anyway. I put him into contact with somebody. And he ended up catching 2 fish and 2 salmon and what have you. But so he was staying with me. We had guest rooms in the pub at this stage. And the following morning after breakfast, he says, come here. He said, I want to bring you over here. I says, I want to demonstrate a rod to you. And I says, well, the angling season is closed. Well, he said, that's not a problem. He said, there's no flies on that. So he had this rod that he was after. He bought the blanks in China and brought them over. And he said, this is the lightest fly rod in the world. He said, it's 4 ounces. So he starts casting, right, from the slipway across from the pub. And it was incredible. And it turned out that he used to go to these angling shows demonstrating casting. And he says, all right, now he says, I want to show you. And he puts a fly on. And he says, I want to show you how to change a fly in a hurry. And he casts the full out his line. He casts it right, 2 false casts, and then out. And then he goes flick. And the fly comes back. He puts his hand up and he misses it. And he does it again. And the second time he catches it. That's how you change a fly. It was incredible. Anyway, yeah. Over that night, over a pint, I'm telling him about my difficulties with the sea trout. And he says, the important thing, he says, the most important thing about fishing sea trout is you must get your fly down to your fish. Whereas I was fishing a floating line. And any fish up on top, and any fish I was catching, not very often, they were just small thing, right? So I put on, the following day after he left, I went down and I put on a weighted woolly bugger, a white woolly bugger with a weighted, probably a lead head on it. Yeah. It was something that I found somewhere and what have you. And I put on a teal blue and silver dropper. And I went down and I went on to the beach actually. and I had 9 fish in the space of about maybe a half an hour. And the first cast I had, the second cast I had, I got a fish that would be just short of 2 pounds on the dropper, right? Not the dropper, on the lead fly, the woolly bugger.
On the woolly bugger, the weighted one.
So what he did then, he sent me a Danica reels, carbon reels, because I had tried a few reels and they'd seized up at me with the salt water, but they were steel reels, they're metal reels. And so this one was a carbon reel. He sent this Danica reel to me and a glass line, which was an intermediate line. And I went on from there. And hey, then I got to the stage where I knew the day that I wouldn't catch a fish, and I knew the day that I was going to catch fish. And that's the way the fly fishing is. I mean, you'd have as many blank days as you would have good days with the fly. Whereas with the bait fishing, you're much more successful.
You found that out really early with the fly fishing, you know. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, that day, let's say the first day that you had the 9 and you tried the weighted woolly bugger, did you catch any on that teal blue and silver?
I did. I had 2 double hookups.
Right. And I'm sure you would have used that fly before when you were just fishing on the top, wouldn't you? Because we nearly all go to that. Yes. Yeah, but so that would have shown you straight away that the fly getting down obviously was one of the key elements of it.
Exactly. And then when I got into the night fishing, I discovered that you're wasting your time with an intermediate. You have to be on the surface.
Yeah.
And the first night I tried it off the shore of Barch Island. I pitched a tent and what have you. Well, a lot of people go down to Bartra and pitch tents just, to stay for a few days and what have you. But anyway, I pitched my tent and I hooked this fish and hey, zzz, and I thought to myself, my God, I have the daddy of them all. And it turned out I had him by the arse. And he had his head and he just took off. And he was, again, about 1.5 pounds, 2 pounds or whatever. And but I thought he was about 5 pounds the way he was playing, right? But that was on a floating line. That was the other thing I removed. Floating line night is a sink tip or an intermediate you have to get down to
for the day. And you said there you'd know and you found out quick enough when the fly was going to work and when it wasn't. What are, let's say, just the basic ones that you'd noticed, just the basic ones?
Well, I was with Jack Charlton one day. Charlton was fishing with me quite a lot at that stage. And he said, "Wait," he says, "you notice something?" He said, when the sun comes out from the clouds, he says, we hit fish. When the sun is covered, which goes back, the conditions, the best conditions for bait fishing or for fly fishing in salt water is when you have a blue sky and you have calm water and you have nice temperature, nice, warm water as well. And as I call it, bikini weather.
Right.
That's
the exact opposite. Yeah, the exact opposite to how we'd like it on the lake.
When the salmon and the brown trout are at its worst, I'm at its best. But except, unfortunately, this year, we haven't got that weather.
You haven't had it, yeah.
No, we haven't.
And Jack Charlton was noticing this, was he?
The what?
Was Jack Charlton, was it him that pointed out about the clouds?
Well, about the light and what have you.
Yeah.
It's him that really brought it to my attention. But I have to tell you about him. The first he was coming into my pub. He came in about 3 times, I think, when Jean said, Jack Charlton was in here looking for you. Now, I had never met him. And I was like, I'm not a soccer buff. But I mean, the whole world was looking at Ireland winning, back in the 90s or whatever it was. And he was a bit of a hero. And so I walked into the pub one day and here he was standing at the counter in my front bar with the farmers. And he says, "Oi, what about the sea trout?" And I said, "What about them?" He says, "Well, I keep hearing about them," he says, "but I haven't seen any." And tongue in cheek, I said to him, "But you haven't fished with the expert, have you?" He turned it out to the farmers, and he gives me the nod, or and as much to say, who the hell is he? Anyway, I tell you what, the season was closed at that stage. I said, when you come back in season, I'll take you out for a day. So the day came. We went down to a place called opposite the castle, and I said, right. And he arrived with a gammy set up and what have you. And I says, look, use my rod. So we were mackerel fishing, and he and remind me to go back to the mackerel too. But anyway, I said, just cast in there on that wall. We have training walls on the estuary to keep the channel straight. They were put in by a Dutch company back in the 1800s. Anyway, the tide was running off, and there was a little bay inside, and everything that was in there, it was going to dry out. So they were coming out. First cast is into a fish. Nice fish, about a pound. Second cast, another fish. Third cast. And this keeps going on, and I'm standing there with the landing net. And I don't say anything because this had never happened before. And as a matter of fact, it has never happened since. I'm not kidding you. So he goes, fucking hell, he says, 7 fish, 7 casts and 7 fish. And the expert hasn't wet a line. So I eventually said to him, I said, come on. I says, we have to go. He says, where are you going? I said, if we stay here, I says, we'll be able to walk home. And oh yeah, he says, I heard that one before. So I said, Jack, I said, no problem. I said, there's plenty of fish in the river. I says, but really all the fish are backing out. And I said, this is going to dry out. So he wasn't happy. I lifted the anchor anyway. And no, I had to get him to lift the anchor because I had a bigger boat, 27-footer. And so we went fishing. Not a bite. I fished all over the river. Not a bite. Until 5 o'clock. And during the day, he said to me, you must be the worst skipper I've ever been out with. Taking the piss out of me, and what have you. So we had agreed in the morning that I said, what time do you want to be back? And he said, well, I don't mind what time we're back as long as we're back in time to take Pat out for something to eat. And I says, okay, we'll be back for 6 o'clock. So we get back to the opposite side of the river, but from where we had started in the morning, and we hit fish again. And he's going bang, 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 cast after cast, fish. And 5:30 comes, I says, last cast. And of course, he never even blinked. He just keeps fishing. So I went up and I started the engine. It was diesel inboard. I started the engine, give her a touch of forward, and I'm pulling the anchor. And he says, oi, where are you going? I said, you said you had to be back for 6 o'clock to take Pat out for something to eat. Oh, don't worry about that, he says. I'll tell her you ran up in a sandbag. So that was my opening day with Charlton. And after that, we got on like a house on fire. I knew nothing about soccer, and he knew nothing about jazz and what have you. The only thing that we had in common was fishing rods. And I mean, was this man passionate? I saw him one day, we were salmon fishing, and the water was running off his nose. And he says, well, come on, one last cast, and what have you. It was, fishing was his passion.
Yeah, I didn't realize he'd done the sea trout in the estuary, which I'd obviously known about the salmon. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, he did a lot. He loved it, and I went, as a result, he invited me over to Scotland to fish sea trout over there on the Ecky, and I have to tell you about that one. We did it a few times and we had some success, but this time we're over there. We're staying in a forester's cottage, and we fished the first night below the bridge. There's a road and a bridge and what have you, and it's a narrow river. It's only about 20 foot wide. And you wouldn't dream of casting it. You see, the fascinating thing for the English and the Scottish and the Welsh is they don't wet a line until it gets dark. And when they come over here and they hear that I fish and catch sea trout in daylight, they're gobsmacked. And like Charlton, And so he had to come out and experience it. So he says, I know a place, he says, in Scotland, he says, where there's any amount of trout, he says, and nobody fishes during the day. It's where the submarine base is, up on the west coast of Scotland. And anyway, it was the River Ecky. So we fished the first night, and we could hear fish jumping up above the bridge. We caught nothing. And the next morning he says to me, "Oi, get your rod." I said, "Where are you going?" He says, "Just get your rod, come on." So I'm the chauffeur. We go drive down to the bridge, and he climbs over the gate on the far side of the bridge. And I said, "Jack," I says, "you're on the wrong side. Come on." So we climb over anyway, and the next thing he puts his hand into his pocket and his jacket. He pulls out a jar of worms, and he puts a hook on the fly rod. And there's a little bush over the far side of the river, and he's lobbing it over and floating it under the bush, what have you. He said, "Now you go up there to the bend," he says, about 50 yards away. You go up the bend, keep an eye out. And I'm up there with a fly rod, knowing damn well I'm not going to catch anything. And eventually I'm looking around, and there's a high bank behind me, and I look around, and there's this handlebar mustache and +4 tweeds looking at me. He says, "Good morning." And I got the fright of my life. And he says, "Could I have your name, please?" Well, he says, "I'm with my friend down here." I go, "It's Jack." And of course, Jack is deaf. Jack is still lopping the worm. And I said, "Excuse me." And I go down the river bank, and I'm calling Jack. By the time I get to Jack anyway, there's no sign of a worm or a hook. And I said, "Jack, this gentleman wants to have a word with you." And he looks around, and your man goes, "Oh, Mr. Charlton, wonderful to see you. How are you? My brother is up from London, and he would love to meet you. You must come to dinner tonight." And so by the time dinner was finished that night, we could have fished all of that river free of charge all our lives.
Oh my God.
that was Charlton. It was incredible.
Yeah, some character. Can I ask you, Judd, about the runs of sea trout? How has it been in the time you've been fishing it? Has it been affected? Like you mentioned, obviously earlier, about the great sea trout that we had in Connemara, and that was lost. Has the estuary been affected in the time?
No, you see, I tell you, it's like 100 years ago. Anyway, I don't know, 30 years ago, whatever it was. I'm a golfer as well, and I was running a golf classic, the first golf classic for Ballina Rugby Club. And there was a team down from Dublin, and one of the guys was from Irish Lights. And at a late night pint, he said, "By the way," he says, "I just want to let you know," he says, "that the Department of the Marine have been in contact with Irish Lights as to how navigable the Moy Estuary would be towards granting a fish farm license to an individual." So I found out the details of the individual, and so I had given a stuffed salmon that I had in the pub to the Northwestern Regional Fisheries Board, and they were launching the Moy Development Plan in Kitty O'Shea's in Dublin, and I was there as a guest. And Dr. Michael Woods was the Minister for Agriculture, which was fisheries was under that time. And so when it was finished, I spoke to him, and I said that, you have this wonderful river for salmon and sea trout and what have you, and it will be destroyed if a fish farm goes in there. So one Sunday morning after a jazz session, his Minister of State arrives down. I forget his name. I know he's deceased now, but he arrives down and he says, can you fill me in? And so I brought him up. I said, "You see all these houses here, B&Bs and what have you?" I says, "There's a whole industry," I says, "here between salmon and sea trout and what have you. It will be destroyed." And the following Sunday, Brian Cowan, who was a junior minister at the time, but he was also a friend of mine, he arrives in. He says, "What's wrong with you now?" So I told him the story. None of them actually entered into a discussion with me. They just took notes on what I was saying and what have you. And about 6 weeks later, in the papers, I didn't even know this was possible. I see where I read where the Donegal coastline, the Sligo coastline, and the North Mayo coastline were designated as exclusion zones from fish farms. Now, Donegal had lost its sense, but Sligo and North Mayo have it. And we've never had a problem with the sea lice and the trout. I mean, you don't have to be a scientist, a marine biologist, to actually identify, to see this. And like Peter Mantle, when he started Save Our Sea Trout on the Delphi, our Sea Trout Angling Club here, we were the first to donate money towards that Save the Sea Trout, which was never acknowledged. And nobody from fisheries, I'm not kidding you, it was so obvious. Nobody came back to say thank you, or what are you doing right, or what's happening.
That's interesting though, isn't it? Like, Judd, talk about the black and white. You see what happened in Connemara, and you have apologists for fish farms, and then all you have to do is look at the North Mayo coastline, which is being excluded, and the numbers that are still there. God, what would have happened if there had been a fish farm introduced and allowed there? But I have to say, Judd, fair play to you for what you're able to fight for your corner up in North Mayo. And it goes to show you, like you said, if you knew, Brian Cowan, it's still the power of knowing somebody in Ireland, isn't it? Like, in terms of the local politicians or whoever, like. But come here, Judd, I could talk to you all night in terms of your stories, the music. I hadn't realised the musical background. I'm just fascinated by that. I think that's just amazing, like, in terms of the big band and the years on the road, and just how, despite it all, the Moy Estuary still called back to you, was still harking, throughout it all.
People say to me, I'm 79 now, and I sold my business, retired from it. I sold the business in 2001, right? And I said, right, they can keep everything now, but I said, I'm keeping the boats. And I'm a golfer. So between golf in the winter but the people say to me, when are you going to retire, Judd? And, I say, when you hear I'm 6 foot under, I've retired. Because, I mean, I have the best fish job in the world. I have 80% of my business are repeats. And I have old friends coming back year after year. I get into the boat and what have you, and we have the chat and this type of thing. And they know me well enough that when the weather gets bad and what have you, I ring up people that I cancel. I don't cancel anymore because there's so much of my business is Irish now, from Northern Ireland and from Southern Ireland, that I say, can we postpone? And like, for instance, I had some people from Dublin last Saturday that I had to postpone. I postponed them from June to July to last Saturday, and I couldn't fish them. I have 2 guys, Peter Hannon, who was in the meat industry. He comes from Straffan and Kildare originally. He's up in Northern Ireland in the meat business. He's fishing with me for maybe 25 years plus, and he was to fish with me in June, July, and next Tuesday and Wednesday, and already I've called that off because of the condition of the water, and it's going to take another, I would say, if the rain stopped tomorrow, it would take another week for the Moy to be, the estuary to be fishable. And last Sunday, I had to go down with a family from Longford to spread the ashes of an old friend of mine who fished with me. And I came on about 8 or 9 shoals, big shoals of sea trout. And if you had a rod with you, you'd be wasting your time. They were coming in on the tide, but it was black. It was as black as the ace of spades, and you'd be wasting your time. It's so frustrating, But now, when I was able to fish, we had these winds that were driving the fish back into the sea. Now we had, and the one thing that I was waiting for months was a good thunderstorm, and we got that a week ago, and that cleared the air. And then we got the rains and the flood, and they were the perfect things to just clean out the whole system and then start fresh, except it has continued now. So I'm just keeping the fingers crossed for the week after next week.
I want to spend a day in the boat with you. Great guys like yourself, like Tom, is that you can be in the boat, and if you're catching, brilliant. But if you're not, you're still in good company, hearing great stories. Whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter. You're hearing great stories, and it makes for a memorable day, one way or the other.
I had a Yank out on the boat one day, and he was staying in one of the local hotels. He just wanted to go on a trip down the river. And I said, by the way, I said, when we're going down, would you like to hear some of the history of? Oh, he said, yeah, man. He said, let it all hang out. He says, even if it's lies, I want to hear it.
Exactly. Well, listen, speaking of lies, Judd, final question. Could you tell us, what was your most memorable fish on the fly?
Not a particular one fish, but I can tell you my most memorable day. I had a guy called from London called Steve Hazeldine. He used to come over and take 3 days on the reach pool and what have you, and he would spend 2 days with me. And we had our ups and downs and what have you, bad days, good days, and what have you. One day I went in and very close to the Scormore Beach. It's an area that fills in the tide and empties when it's gone, and the place just erupted. Now it had been, we had signs of it for a few days coming, of fish showing. We got into it, anchored the boat, and I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating when I say it. Literally every cast, we were hitting fish 2 pound weight, and they were jumping 2-3 feet out of the water, gone, lost. Cast again into them, into the boat, out again, lost. This was going on for maybe an hour or whatever. It was incredible. And so tide ran out, and I said, come on, I show you how to fish with a spinning rod. So we did a bit of that when the tide was out. When the tide turned, we made our way slowly back into the area as the tide was swayed, enough water to get back in, and suddenly the fish started jumping again. And we had, I don't know, but anyway, he's in his 80s now, and he's had a new knee operation this year, so he couldn't come. And he still talks about that day. That, to me, was the ultimate with the fly. I mean, it was the one that you dream of. It was just perfect. I've never had it since. I mean, I've had, good days and whatever, but not with the quality of fish, and literally every cast. And then when the tide, normally you get one tide to fish, and then when the tide changes, you could see it, now it's hard to get 2 tides to fish. This day we got the whole works. That was the day. And it was all day on the sunflower, that blue sunflower. That was the one. Did the job. But I had great success with pink and white and various other colors. I had a fly that I used to call the clown, because I had blue and yellow and I forget whatever. I had a few colors on it. And be Jesus, I'm not kidding you. It was, as soon as it hit the water, you'd have a fish.
That was the ultimate red letter day, though. Yeah. Wow, that just, brilliant.
That was
fantastic.
Well, Judd, long may the successful days continue. If people are interested in finding out more, it's fishingireland.ie is the website. But it's interesting, like you said, Judd, 80% of your business is repeat. So, if people want to get a day out in the water, which they need to be booking for next year, I think, at this stage, and try and fit them in somehow. Judd, it's been an absolute...
Book early.
Yeah, exactly. Judd, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I do hope we can catch up again and hopefully see you on the water as well. So thanks a million for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Our thanks to Judd Ruane for joining us on the show. And don't forget to rate, review and follow the Ireland on the Fly podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Plus, you can keep up to date on IrelandOnTheFly.com as well as on Instagram, and myself and Tom will be back with another episode about the people and places of fly fishing in Ireland.